most of the time than go to an actual game. I'd rather, because I like the close-ups and all of that. So,
for decades, Axl Rose was known for his wild behavior, explosive performances, and total silence when it came to his personal struggles. But now, after years of keeping it all inside, he's finally opening up. In a rare and emotional moment, Axl breaks his silence on the one thing he wishes he could take back, the one decision that's haunted him more than any riot, breakup, or headline ever could. Join us as we uncover the story behind Axl Rose's biggest regret and the pain he's carried for over 30 years. The rise of Guns N' Roses. Before Axl Rose became the wild and unpredictable frontman of Guns N' Roses, he was a troubled kid growing up in a small town in Indiana. Born William Bruce Rose Jr. On February 6, 1962, in Lafayette, Indiana, Axl's early life was anything but easy. His biological father left the family when Axl was just a toddler. His mother remarried a man named Stephen Bailey, and Axl took his stepfather's last name, becoming William Bailey. Behind closed doors, Axl faced a harsh and abusive home. His stepfather was extremely strict and reportedly physically and emotionally abusive. Axl grew up in a deeply religious household, where he was forced to attend church several times a week. The strict Christian environment didn't offer him much freedom or comfort. Over time, Axl began to act out and developed a reputation in school as a troublemaker. But underneath the behavior was a young man dealing with a lot of pain. Music became one of his few escapes. He sang in church choirs and began exploring rock music in his teenage years. By the time he was in his late teens, he discovered that the man he thought was his real father wasn't. This revelation shattered what was left of his trust in adults. Not long after, Axl left Indiana for Los Angeles, hoping to start over. Los Angeles was a different world. At first, Axl had nothing. He couch surfed, slept on floors, and even spent nights on the street. To survive, he took odd jobs and hustled wherever he could. But while life was hard, he was determined. He began performing in local bands and slowly built his presence in the underground music scene. He adopted the name Axl and fully stepped into his new identity. In this gritty world, he began forming the persona that would later shock the music industry. Axl's path crossed with several other young musicians trying to make it in Los Angeles. One of them was Izzy Stradlin, a fellow Indiana native and close friend from back home. Together, they were involved in a few early bands, including Hollywood Rose. But everything changed when they teamed up with three other key players: Saul Hudson, better known as Slash, Duff McKagan, and Steven Adler. In 1985, Guns N' Roses was officially formed. The band was a mix of hard rock, punk attitude, and raw bluesy soul. Their chemistry was undeniable, but it wasn't always smooth. Each member had a strong personality and a deep hunger for success. They were messy, loud, and unpredictable, both on stage and off. But that wild energy was exactly what made them special. They rehearsed constantly, played small clubs, and developed a loyal fan base. The turning point came when they began working on their debut album, Appetite for Destruction. The band poured everything into the record: pain, rage, desire, and frustration. The songs weren't polished or commercial. They were real, honest, and full of fire. Tracks like It's So Easy, Out to Get Me, and Mr. Brownstone showed the darker side of life, while Sweet Child O' Mine and Paradise City added melody and emotion. Appetite for Destruction was released in July 1987. At first, it got little attention. Radio stations weren't playing the songs, and MTV wasn't interested, but that changed fast. As Welcome to the Jungle began gaining airplay, the album exploded in popularity. People had never seen or heard a band like this before. Once Guns N' Roses hit, they hit hard. Welcome to the Jungle showed a dangerous, raw side of Los Angeles that most bands ignored. Then came Sweet Child O' Mine, a love song with one of the most iconic guitar riffs in rock history. The music video helped push the band into the mainstream. Soon, Appetite for Destruction became the best-selling debut album of all time. The band's rise to fame was intense and fast. They were suddenly everywhere, on magazine covers, playing sold-out arenas, and being talked about on every music show. But the attention wasn't just about the music. Guns N' Roses had a reputation. They were loud, angry, and often out of control. Axl, in particular, became known for his fiery attitude and unpredictable behavior. Behind the scenes, things were already getting tense. Drug use was a major problem within the band. Heroin and alcohol were constant companions for several members. Arguments were common, and egos were clashing. Axl often showed up late to shows or stormed off stage mid-performance. Still, the fans kept coming. The danger and chaos were part of the experience. Even as things got rough internally, the band continued to put out massive hits. The follow-up albums, GNR Lies, and the two-part Use Your Illusion kept their momentum going. But with every step forward, there were new problems. Management changes, arrests, and personal conflicts made the band's future uncertain. Yet somehow, despite everything, Guns N' Roses kept delivering powerful, unforgettable music. Lovers and lawsuits. One of Axl Rose's most talked-about relationships was with Aaron Everly, the daughter of Don Everly from the famous Everly Brothers. Their relationship began in the mid-1980s, long before Guns N' Roses became a household name. Aaron was young, beautiful, and connected to the music world through her family. But what brought her and Axl together was something deeper. Axl saw her as a muse and a partner during a time when he was still trying to find his place in the world. Their relationship wasn't just romantic. It had a direct impact on his music. Axl wrote Sweet Child O' Mine about Aaron, and the lyrics reflected a softer, more vulnerable side of him that fans rarely saw. The song became a massive hit and remains one of the band's most well-known tracks. It captured a moment of genuine love and beauty in Axl's life, but sadly, that moment didn't last. Behind the music was a relationship filled with emotional highs and devastating lows. In April 1990, Axl and Aaron eloped to Las Vegas and got married. But within just a few weeks, Axl filed for an annulment. They briefly tried to reconcile, but things only got worse. Aaron later spoke publicly about the abuse she suffered during their time together. She described emotional manipulation, physical violence, and threats. Although Axl never admitted to these claims directly, court documents and interviews confirmed the serious nature of the situation. Aaron eventually filed a lawsuit against Axl, which ended in a confidential settlement. Looking back, their relationship showed just how unstable Axl could become when his emotions got out of control. What started as a love story turned into something painful and damaging for both of them. After things ended with Aaron, Axl moved on to another high-profile romance, this time with supermodel Stephanie Seymour. They met in the early 1990s when Seymour was one of the most famous models in the world. Their relationship started with passion and attention. She even starred in two of Guns N' Roses' most iconic music videos, Don't Cry and November Rain. In the November Rain video, she played Axl's bride, and their fictional wedding was seen by millions. For a while, it looked like Axl had found a perfect match. They were one of rock's most glamorous couples. But again, the relationship quickly turned rocky. There were frequent fights, reports of jealousy, and emotional outbursts. By 1993, the engagement was called off, and both sides were accusing each other of violence and harassment. Stephanie eventually filed a lawsuit against Axl, claiming he had physically abused her during their relationship. Axl denied the allegations and responded with a lawsuit of his own, accusing her of attacking him. Like his previous relationship, this one ended with legal action, emotional damage, and more headlines than healing. What made this relationship different, though, was that it pushed Axl further into isolation. Friends said he started to change after the breakup. He became more reclusive, less trusting, and more emotionally guarded. This was around the same time his behavior with the band began spiraling further out of control. If there's one clear pattern in Axl's romantic history, it's that his relationships often started with intense love and ended in total collapse. Over time, it became clear that these weren't just bad matches. Axl was struggling with deeper emotional problems. Much of it can be traced back to his childhood. Growing up in a home with abuse, secrecy, and strict religious rules shaped the way Axl saw love, trust, and control. He didn't just fear being abandoned, he expected it. This led to possessiveness, explosive arguments, and extreme reactions when things didn't go his way. His need to control situations, especially in relationships, became overwhelming. He would swing between being incredibly loving and deeply threatening. That kind of emotional roller coaster left his partners hurt and afraid. Rebellion, rage, and riots. Axl Rose was never the type to stay quiet or play by the rules. On stage, he was fierce, passionate, and full of energy. But that same fire also led to some of the most chaotic moments in rock history. From riots to walkouts to long periods of silence, Axl's unpredictable behavior shaped the image of Guns N' Roses and made headlines all over the world. One of the most notorious events in Axl Rose's history happened on July 2, 1991, during a Guns N' Roses concert at the Riverport Amphitheater in St. Louis, Missouri. The show was packed, and the crowd was loud and excited. Everything was going well until Axl spotted someone in the audience with a camera. At the time, bringing cameras into concerts was against the rules, and Axl had a strict policy about it. Mid-song, Axl suddenly stopped singing. He pointed at the man with the camera and shouted at security to take it away. When security didn't act quickly, Axl jumped off the stage into the crowd to try and grab it himself. After a brief scuffle, he returned to the microphone and said, "Thanks to the lame security, I'm going home." Then he slammed the mic down and walked off stage. What followed was complete chaos. The crowd became angry and restless. Fans began throwing bottles, tearing out chairs, and storming parts of the venue. A full-scale riot broke out. Dozens of people were injured, and the amphitheater was heavily damaged. Police were called in to stop the violence. The event quickly made national news. Axl was later charged with inciting a riot, but he wasn't arrested until months later. He eventually faced a court case but was found not guilty. Still, the damage was done. St. Louis officials banned Guns N' Roses from performing there again for years. The incident hurt Axl's image, painting him as unstable and out of control. While some fans admired his boldness, others saw it as selfish and dangerous. Just a year later, Guns N' Roses found themselves at the center of another disaster, this time in Montreal, Canada. On August 8, 1992, GNR was co-headlining a show with Metallica as part of their joint tour. Metallica took the stage first, and things went terribly wrong early in their set. Frontman James Hetfield was seriously burned by a pyrotechnic blast. He was rushed off the stage, and the show came to a sudden stop. The crowd was shocked, but remained hopeful that Guns N' Roses would come out soon and continue the night. Instead, they waited for over 2 hours before Axl and the band finally came on stage. By that point, tensions were already high. Axl performed just a few songs before complaining about vocal problems and walking off stage. The show was over, and the crowd lost it. Another riot erupted, this time in a different country, but with similar destruction. Fans lit fires, broke windows, and looted nearby stores. People were hurt, and the venue was trashed. The media around the world covered the story, calling it one of the worst concert disasters in rock history. Both Metallica and Guns N' Roses were heavily criticized, But much of the blame fell on Axl. Critics said he had abandoned fans once again. The Montreal riot became another example of Axl's unpredictable behavior, causing real-world consequences. Even when riots didn't happen, Axl Rose was still known for walking off stage or stopping shows mid-performance. He frequently ranted about the press, record executives, and even his own bandmates. These outbursts became a regular part of Guns N' Roses concerts. Sometimes they were short speeches, and other times they turned into angry rants that confused or upset fans. He often lashed out at journalists, accusing them of twisting his words or focusing too much on his personal life. He also criticized police, promoters, and even fans who weren't giving enough energy. This created a feeling that anything could happen at a GNR show, which some people loved, but many found exhausting. Concert delays became common. Guns N' Roses would sometimes take the stage hours late, causing fans to wait deep into the night. Axl's refusal to perform on time became a part of the band's reputation. Some venues even banned the group from returning because of the chaos and lawsuits that followed. Despite all this, the band's popularity stayed strong for a while. Fans kept showing up, hoping to see a legendary performance, even if it came with a meltdown. The shows, when they went smoothly, were unforgettable. But the fear that something could go wrong never left. The chaos eventually caught up with the band. Internally, relationships were breaking down. Axl's fights with Slash became more frequent, and tensions rose with other band members too. Lawsuits were filed over everything from royalties to control of the band's name. Axl took legal action to gain full control of the Guns N' Roses name, which drove a deeper wedge between him and the original lineup. By the mid-1990s, Axl began disappearing from public view. While other bands were touring or releasing new albums, Guns N' Roses went quiet. Axl shut himself away in his mansion, working on what would eventually become the Chinese Democracy album, a project that took more than a decade to complete. Fans were left confused and disappointed. Some wondered if GNR was over for good. Axl's image went from dangerous rock star to mysterious recluse. The man who once dominated stages around the world was now seen only in rare paparazzi photos or leaked studio rumors. During this time, Axl also cut ties with almost everyone from the original band. Only a few close people stayed in contact with him. He spent years in therapy and eventually began speaking publicly about his mental health struggles. But the damage from the past, the riots, the lawsuits, the failed relationships, continued to shape how people viewed him. The Castle Donington tragedy. On August 20th, 1988, Guns N' Roses played one of the biggest shows of their early career. They were part of the Monsters of Rock festival at Castle Donington in England. For a band that had only released their debut album the year before, this was a huge moment. Around 100,000 people came to the festival, most of them eager to see Guns N' Roses perform live. The energy was intense. The crowd was packed shoulder to shoulder. The weather was wet, and the ground had turned to mud. Despite warnings from officials about potential safety risks, the festival pushed forward. The crowd was already wild by the time Guns N' Roses took the stage. There were not enough safety measures in place to control such a large and excited audience. Security struggled to manage the front of the crowd, and barriers weren't strong enough to hold people back. As soon as the band began playing, the pit became dangerous. During the performance of It's So Easy, the crowd began surging forward. Fans were pushing closer to the stage, many slipping and falling in the mud. In the middle of all this chaos, two young fans, 18-year-old Alan Dick and 20-year-old Landon Siggers, were crushed and trampled. They were pulled from the crowd by medics, but it was too late. Both died from their injuries. Dozens more were injured in the crowd crush. The tragic part was that Guns N' Roses had no idea what was happening. No one told them about the deaths while they were on stage. The band continued playing, unaware that people in the audience were fighting for their lives. After the show ended, the news began to spread. Fans, media, and the band all learned the terrible truth. 2 lives were lost at a concert that was meant to be a celebration. The aftermath was intense. An investigation was launched into the event, focusing on security failures and overcrowding. Many people blamed the festival organizers for not taking the proper precautions. Others pointed fingers at the band, saying their aggressive music and energy may have added to the dangerous atmosphere. While the band wasn't legally held responsible, the tragedy stayed with them, especially Axl. In later interviews, Axl spoke about the Castle Donington tragedy with deep sadness. He said he could still see the image of blood on the stage in his mind. The idea that people had died while he was performing haunted him for years. It was one of the first moments in his career where the cost of fame became painfully real. He realized that being a rock star came with serious responsibility, and the emotional weight of that night never fully left him. BPD and breakdown. For most of his early career, Axl Rose's behavior was seen as wild, rebellious, or just plain unstable. But what many didn't know at the time was that he was also struggling with serious mental health issues that went undiagnosed for years. One of the biggest challenges in his life was borderline personality disorder, a condition that affects a person's ability to manage emotions, relationships, and self-image. It wasn't talked about much in the rock world back then, but looking back, many signs were there. People who knew Axl well described extreme mood swings. One day he'd be calm and generous, and the next he might explode in anger or suddenly disappear. He had intense fears of abandonment and would become controlling or distant if he thought someone might leave him. These are classic signs of BPD. Friends and people who worked with him noticed he could become paranoid, often convinced that others were trying to betray him or take advantage of him. These emotional extremes weren't just part of his rock star persona, they were part of his daily life. The pressure of fame made it even harder to deal with. Axl had trouble trusting people, including bandmates, managers, and even romantic partners. When things didn't go his way, he often reacted with intense anger, or withdrew completely. Without knowing what was really happening in his mind, many people simply labeled him as difficult or out of control. By the mid to late 1990s, things had reached a breaking point. Guns N' Roses had basically fallen apart. Axl had withdrawn from the public eye, and he was living in almost complete isolation. It was during this time that he finally agreed to get professional help. He began therapy, slowly opening up about his childhood trauma, emotional pain, and fears. Through this process, he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Getting that diagnosis wasn't easy for Axl. At first, he resisted the idea that something was wrong. He didn't want to take medication, and he didn't trust most therapists. But eventually, after years of struggling alone, he started to make progress. He found professionals he could work with, and he learned tools to help manage his emotions and relationships. This didn't mean the old Axl disappeared overnight. He still had rough moments, and the healing process was slow. But over time, those who saw him up close noticed a real difference. He became more patient, more focused, and less reactive. In the later years of his career, especially after the release of Chinese Democracy, there were fewer outbursts and much more stability. He wasn't completely fixed, but he had come a long way from the chaos of the 80s and early 90s. For the general public, Axl Rose was always seen as the angry, unpredictable frontman of Guns N' Roses. That image stuck with him, and in many ways, it overshadowed the real struggles he was dealing with behind closed doors. Fans saw the walkouts, the fights, the rants, and the riots. They didn't see the panic attacks, the fear, or the emotional crashes that came afterward. Borderline personality disorder explained so much of what made Axl hard to understand. His intense relationships, his sudden changes in mood, and his need for control were all symptoms of a condition he hadn't even known he had for most of his life. It also explained why he pushed people away, even the ones who cared about him most. For someone with BPD, closeness can feel terrifying because it comes with the fear of being abandoned. Axl Rose's biggest regret. Before the fame, the headlines, and the chaos, there was a small group of musicians trying to make it in the gritty, wild rock scene of Los Angeles in the early 1980s. One of those musicians was Todd Crew. He was the bassist for Jet Boy, a glam metal band that was starting to gain attention in the LA scene. Todd wasn't a household name like Axl Rose or Slash, but to those who knew him, he was unforgettable, charismatic, fun, and full of energy. He had a loud laugh, a magnetic personality, and a reputation for partying hard. Todd and Slash were especially close. They were tight friends who shared the same lifestyle: the clubs, the booze, the chaos. Jet Boy and Guns N' Roses were part of the same world, sharing bills at small venues and crashing at each other's places. Todd was well liked by the GNR camp and spent a lot of time with the band, especially in their early days before Appetite for Destruction took off. But Todd also had a serious problem with drugs. He had been struggling with heroin addiction for some time. Back then, a lot of musicians were using it, but Todd was known to go further than most. Even in a scene where partying was normal, people noticed Todd's habits getting worse. Axl Rose didn't have the same kind of bond with Todd that Slash did, but he cared about him. He saw what was happening and was deeply concerned. At a certain point, Axl felt like Todd's drug use was going to lead to something terrible. He didn't want to stand by and watch a friend die from heroin, so he took a hard stance. According to people close to the situation, Axl tried to talk to Todd and even warned him that his addiction was spiraling. But when Todd didn't change, Axl reacted in the only way he thought might work. He cut him off. He told people he's going to kill himself and refused to have any more contact with Todd. He believed that stepping away might wake Todd up or force him to see how serious things had become. But it didn't. What was meant to be an act of tough love ended in silence. Axl never spoke to Todd again. In July 1987, just as Guns N' Roses were starting to blow up, tragedy struck. Todd Crew was found dead in a hotel room in San Francisco. He had overdosed on heroin. He was only 22 years old. He had been partying with people from the rock scene, including Hanoi Rocks guitarist Andy McCoy, and the night ended with a fatal shot. The news hit the LA scene hard. Todd was young, full of promise, and had so many people who cared about him. For Slash, it was heartbreaking. For Axl, it was something worse, because he never got to say goodbye. When Axl heard about Todd's death, he hadn't spoken to him in weeks. The last words between them had been full of frustration and anger. There had been no closure, no final conversation, no chance to take anything back. That silence would haunt Axl for decades. For many years, Axl stayed quiet about Todd's death. It was one of those things that fans and the media didn't really talk about, but in a rare interview many years later, Axl finally opened up. And when he did, it was deeply emotional. He called the death of Todd Crew his greatest regret. Not the riots, not the band breakups, not the failed relationships. It was this: the silence, the decision to walk away. "I thought cutting him off would help," Axl said. "I didn't think it would be the last time I ever spoke to him." His voice broke as he described the guilt and the pain that came after. He explained that he was trying to save Todd, but it didn't work. And now he had to live with the fact that maybe, just maybe, if he had said one more thing or reached out one more time, the story could have ended differently. For someone who had been called cold or selfish by critics, this moment showed a different side of Axl. He wasn't a rock god in that moment. He was just a man dealing with a very human kind of pain. The kind that doesn't go away. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more detailed stories like this one.